I want to start with going over the multiple choice number 2. So go to where you have that in your AP classroom. And I'm going to go to a PDF that has the answers and stuff on it. There were 2 passages on that practice. The one for this week has 4 passages, but you have until I think Wednesday next week to do it. Speaking of AP, I did put in, well, I put it in the stream, but also the YouTube playlist that College Board has every night for this week and next week, Monday through Thursday. They're doing live sessions with different AP teachers. They've last year they started making videos because of lockdown, and they continue that practice this year. So they're having some really good topics. And then of course the ones that here, I made a little, what do you call it, calendar. It's right here under AP study resources, and I also put it on the stream. But if you click on that, it will take you each day to that actual video. And then what you can do is if you go there at, like 5 p.m., then you can be there with the live setup. Or if after the fact, let me better share my screen. Sharing. Okay, so you can find this one right here under additional AP study resources. This is a link to the playlist, but I put it on a calendar because I think it's, I don't know, I'm kind of a chart person. So I like things on charts. And so they're doing 8 different sessions. It's all free because you're in the AP classroom. Actually, I think it's free for anybody. But they are talking about things like breaking down the exam essay structure, how to dig deeper and read actively, what if you get stuck when you're writing, examining structure and symbolism. I mean, I feel like these are some pretty good topics, multiple choice strategies. I imagine they'll probably tell you some of the same things that I'm telling you, but maybe, sometimes other teachers can have different ways of explaining things where all of a sudden the light bulb goes on, or you get some sort of insight or something like that. So I do encourage you, you can watch them live. They're at 5 o'clock each evening, or you can go back, and watch Mondays and just watch the video of it. So I think that if you wanted to sort of boost your study, like if you're just sitting around, you don't have anything to do, you might you might just want to watch one of those videos and just see what those teachers have to say. I'm sure that they're legit and all of that. I haven't watched any of them this year. I watched a bunch of them last year, and they were good. They were on point. So that is right here under the YouTube playlist. You can just also go to their playlist, but I linked all of them on this chart right here for you. So that should be handy. I'm always watching a TED Talk. I don't know, I'm clicking random things. Okay, so go to AP Classroom. What I want to do today, 2 main things. Number 1, I want to go over all of the answers to the multiple choice number 2. So open that up there on your AP Classroom. You know what I should do is I should go to the AP Classroom. Let me stop sharing. I think I have to go in there and open up so you can see your scores and stuff. I think I only gave you 30 minutes to do that one. Let me fix it so that I can. Hold on a second. Let me see. Update settings, that's what it is. Okay, so I'm returning that one. You should be able to see the scores. Tell me if you can see. Like, it should tell you which ones you had right and wrong and all that stuff. If you go to multiple choice practice 2. Let me share my screen again. Is that happening or is that not happening? There's a passage about well, it's from a piece called A New England Nun, and it's about the young woman who breaks off her engagement and is kind of happy about it because now she's going to get to live by herself. That one. And then the poem was Facing It. That's the one you want. So what you want is multiple choice practice 2. Can y'all tell me if you can see your answers and stuff? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can see them.
Good. Yeah, you can. Okay. Because what I want to do is I want to go through that practice. I'm gonna do the same thing next week with practice 3, and we'll probably do maybe 3 of these before the exam. I don't want to jam you up with tons of questions because I think you guys are pretty good at multiple choice, but I do think that it's good to talk about some skills and things like that. So if you can see in AP Classroom your responses that you did to your questions, I'm going to go through and talk about some strategies and also the correct answers. And I want to touch on 5 or 6 of the questions from this practice that the class in general struggled with. There's always some really tough questions. I mean, it's a range of questions. There are a couple where everybody got them right. There's some where it's mixed, and then there's some where more people got it wrong than got it right. And I want to address those because maybe we can pick up some strategies for the exam that way. So overall, this particular practice was pretty good. The class average was 66% overall. Now, on a traditional 70% scale, like what we see in the grade book, 66% is not great. And you're thinking, well, that's not a good grade. But 60% on the multiple choice on the AP exam is sufficient to pass, as long as you write essays on the free responses that are 4s, 5s, somewhere in there, or some range of 3, 4, 5, or something like that. So 60% is like a good target area for you to look at for where you want to be on your multiple choice. So if your percent is higher than that, then you're kind of in good shape as long as you're consistently there. If your percent is lower than that, then you just know that you need to maybe pay attention to the next practices. I'm going to ramp it up. Next, the practice that we have for this week is ramped up a little bit because there are 4 passages, 2 poems and 2 prose pieces. So, but a 66 overall average is pretty good. The class average was 12 out of 18, correct. So you can judge based on that where you are within that average. If you're just coming in, we're going over multiple choice practice 2 from the AP Classroom. So if you want to, I've released those back to you within AP Classroom. And I'm going to go through the practice a little bit and talk about some strategies and some specific questions. So you can access that in your AP Classroom. You'll notice that some of these, the ones I'm going to talk about, have kind of like a beige little caption on them because those are the ones that we had trouble with as a group. So I want to specifically, instead of like talking about all 18 questions, which really we don't have time to do, I'll just talk about the ones that seem to be problematic. All right, so the first passage is about Louisa, who is a young woman who is engaged to a guy named Joe Daggett, and he is kind of sneaking behind her back with this Lily person, and Louisa catches them, and they break off their engagement. And at first you think, oh, it's going to be a heartbreaking scene, but actually she's glad about it because she didn't really want to be married. So she talks later about how nice it's going to be and what a peaceful life she's going to have, and all of that sort of thing. So, a couple of tips. Number one, sometimes these passages are a little complicated because it's hard to keep the characters straight. Sometimes the characters have weird names because they're using an old novel, or sometimes they'll refer to a character first as Joe and then as Daggett, right? And so when you're reading quickly, you're trying to work through this time frame for the test. Sometimes what happens is you start thinking those are two different people. Joe's one person and Daggett's another person. You don't ever put it together that those are two, and there's nothing wrong with that because I feel like that's the natural thing that can happen. But just be on the lookout for that and try to keep the characters straight as much as you can. That will cut down on your confusion of the passage, if that makes sense. So I made a little note here. One tip is to try to keep characters straight. If you're doing a digital test, I don't think you can write on it, but you can have a piece of paper next to you. So if it makes sense real quick to just scratch something out so that you can keep people straight, do that. If you're doing the paper pencil test, you can write right in your booklet. So you can circle or highlight or whatever helps you keep them straight. Another tip is to make sure that you look at footnotes. Sometimes you will see, make this a little bigger. Sometimes you will see that they put in a footnote. They don't do this very often on the AP exam. They're expecting that you have an elevated vocabulary, but sometimes the pieces are old and there are terms that are used that we don't use much today, like troth plight. So they'll put a footnote in. Do use those because they're anticipating that you might not know what that is, and it means an engagement if you don't know what that means. So, or sometimes they'll put in a footnote like where they're talking about, where is it that they're talking about the dog? It's footnote number 2, Caesar's little hermit hut. That was mentioned earlier in the novel, but it's her dog's doghouse that's outdoors. So they give you a little footnote, and all those things can help with your overall comprehension of the passage. A third tip on these prose passages is to look for transitions or shifts. Most of them are 2-column passages. They're about a page, maybe a little shorter, maybe a little longer, but right about 2 columns. And there's usually a shift somewhere at the bottom of the first column or somewhere in the second column, usually. I want to say like 85% of the time. So if you note that, you don't have to make a note, you don't have to stop and annotate it, you're pressed for time. But if you say to yourself, oh, okay, there's the shift. This was going on, and then there was this. Like, remember that passage, that Dalton Trumbo, Johnny Got His Gun passage? It was all about how the father and son had spent these vacations together out fishing, but now he wants to invite his friend, doesn't know how to tell his dad, blah, 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 blah. So the passages have that complexity added to them most of the time. So just look for where that is and make a note of what it's changing from and what it's changing to, and that will help you with your comprehension of the passage. You don't really have time to read them multiple times or for real depth, like you might if it was a homework assignment or we were really looking at something in class in detail. So look for those things and then kind of say to yourself, oh, let me mentally make a note. We're going from this to this now. And there's probably going to be a question about that. So let's go through the answers to this one, and we'll talk about the ones that seem to trip people up a little bit more on this particular practice. So number 1, at the end of paragraph 2, the line, he was afraid of betraying himself as she, is best interpreted to mean, I don't even think you have to read the passage to get that E is the correct answer, but it's how both of them don't really want to express themselves fully. And you could see that with he was as much as she. Number 2, in the middle of the final paragraph, her birthright is best interpreted to mean C, Louisa's chance for marriage, because her chance for marriage is probably going to be over once she breaks off her engagement. But where you might think she'd be disappointed, instead she's not. She's kind of looking forward to it. Number 3, in paragraph 2, that she had heard her write refers to Louisa's belief that Joe has an intimate relationship with Lily. At the very beginning, she hears them talking like in the bushes, and she's like, did I hear that right? And sure enough, her suspicions were accurate that her fiance Joe was having a relationship with Lily. Number 4, the narrator provides the clause, that was as much a matter of course as breathing, most probably as a parenthetical observation that characterizes Louisa. And if I go back to paragraph 2, right, it's right, I should have highlighted it. That was as much a matter of course as breathing is right here in the second line, because she did her housework methodically. She just went back to her usual routine. So that's how you know that the person wasn't for you. If the night after your, you know, situation when you found the person that you're engaged to with somebody else, if the next day you're unbothered, maybe that wasn't the best choice person. Like if you really truly loved them, you would probably be a little upset. So it's about her characterization. Number 5, at the end of the excerpt, Louisa probably believes that Joe Daggett had be a threat to her personal freedom, because she imagined that if she was going to be married to him, she'd have to do all these things in whatever way made him happy and, be the housewife and all of that. But now she can just be a spinster, and that's sort of like freedom for her. All right, number 6 was a problem question. We had 5 people who had that incorrect and 7 correct. Now, I'm not trying to make a big deal out of that. I hope you understand. I'm trying to point that out so that we can, talk about how that question gets answered correctly. I'm not trying to call people out or anything. Which of the following best describes Joe Daggett's speech? When he's talking to her the next day, he uses informal and straightforward language. This is a problem question because it's vocabulary. These words are not in the passage, but if you don't know what colloquial means, or amorous, or pedantic, or pompous, then you don't know which one to answer. So this is where it's important, just as you read for your education, to look up words you don't know when you run across them any old time, because you can't do it on the AP exam. You don't have time. Plus, you're not allowed to use a dictionary. So these are vocabulary questions. So if you got number 6 wrong, it just means, maybe you spend some time working on your vocabulary. You don't have to make a big production out of it. You can just, whenever you run across words you don't know, look them up, figure out what the sentence is. I do that all the time. I probably look up 15 or 20 words a week. And I have a master's degree. We're always learning about words. So, you just keep learning your whole life. And maybe some of the words that you know will pop up here. Colloquial means kind of like cutesy in a regional way, and unfocused. So that doesn't work either. Neither one of those works with his speech. Amorous means with love and passion. No, he's kind of cold, and he says, I guess we should call it off. And she's like, yeah, I guess we should. And pedantic is sort of like in a teaching way, and pompous, like arrogant. He's not that either. Subtle and refined. No, he's just kind of like a guy's guy. He's not super elevated in his vocabulary or anything. He's not refined. So informal and straightforward is your best answer here. That's a vocabulary question. Number 7, by comparing Louisa to an uncloistered nun at the end of the passage, the narrator invites a further comparison between. So a cloister is a convent. So an uncloistered nun would be a nun that does not live at the convent. So the fact that she's not going to be getting married is making it so that she's like an uncloistered nun, because she's not going to be living a married life, and she's going to be living like a single, life without a partner. So the answer is the condition of Louisa's life and life in a convent. That one was pretty easy. The dominant element of Joe and Louisa's meeting is C, tactfulness. They're both, kind of honest and straightforward. They're not getting ugly about it. And they're just moving past their disagreement and making a decision. Number 9, the chief effect of the imagery and figures of speech in the last 4 sentences of the final paragraph is 2E, affirm an atmosphere of reclusive peace and tranquility. That's the part where she's talking about how she can, mend her clothes and sew things, and the peacefulness of her future life. She seems excited for it. Number 10, the excerpt is chiefly concerned with B, decision and its effect. This is kind of like saying, what is the basic structure of the narrative? She makes a decision, they decide together they're going to call it off, and then the effect is that she gets to live this kind of life. I think you might be tempted to put D, hope in its defeat, if you misread and think that she was very eager to get married, but she's not. Number 11, the images in the first 3 sentences of the final paragraph suggest that D, Louisa had been quite troubled by the prospect of matrimony. Let me go back to that final paragraph. So the weeds and grasses might cluster around his hut, the snow might fall on his roof year in and year out, but he would never go on a rampage through the unguarded village. Now that little canary might turn itself into a peaceful yellow ball. So it's all about the peace of the animals, and the, seasons are going by, and she could sit there with her needlework and do all the things that she wanted to do. Outside was the fervid summer afternoon. The air was filled with the sounds of the busy harvest of men and birds and bees, and there were halloos, metallic clatterings, sweet calls, long hummings, and she sat prayerfully numbering her days like an uncloistered nun. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but she seems to be favoring that rather than getting married. Okay, 12 I think was the toughest question for us this time around. The second half of paragraph 2 serves to show that Louisa was capable of B, directing a conversation with discretion and subtlety. So even now as she is the thing. Starting right here. Oops. Even now, she could hardly believe that she had heard aright, and that she would not do Joe a terrible injury should she break her troth plight. She wanted to sound him without betraying too soon her own inclinations for the matter. So she wants to sound him, means that she wants to find out how he feels about it without giving away that she didn't really care if they break it off. So she's going to kind of like see how he reacts to see if he really cares about marrying her or not, because she's finding out that she doesn't really care if she marries him or not at all. She did it successfully, and they finally came to an understanding, but it was a difficult thing, for he was as afraid of betraying himself as she. So neither one of them really were super excited about getting married to the other one. So let me go back to that question. It was this right here. So it's a characterization question. Serves to show how Louisa was capable of directing a conversation with discretion and subtlety. She doesn't fly off the handle and start screaming, "I heard you with Lily." She doesn't do any of that stuff. She just is patient. She wants to hear what he has to say, and then they agree together. So maybe there's vocabulary here too, like equivocating. Equivocating means to go back and forth. I can't decide, right? So sometimes when there's enough words in the answer choices that you might be unfamiliar with, it's hard to choose one. Discretion means that you're doing something discreetly, right? You're not making a big scene or calling attention to yourself. So maybe this was a vocabulary issue also, or I don't know. You have to go back to the passage all the time and look and see that section, what was happening. That helps too. All right, so then the poem on this practice is Facing It by Yusuf Komunyakaa, who is an American Vietnam veteran writer. And this is the only test, was actually on the AP exam, both of these years ago, but this is the only one that I ever knew that had a picture with it, because the description of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., understanding what that looks like is crucial to understanding the poem. You have to understand that it's black granite, that it's shiny, that you like a mirror, that all the names are written of all the people who died in that war, and you can walk along and read all of them, and then it's in a chevron, a V. So when you look at it from above, it's a V, like for Vietnam and for veteran. So knowing that, and then you put a little description right here, helps. On poetry multiple choice, you're going to get some old poems and you're going to get some new poems. They usually put the easier ones at the beginning of the test. So if that helps you. I think if it's an old poem, focus on the formal qualities. You know, is it a sonnet? Does it have a certain pattern to the stanzas that will help you figure out the meaning? That sort of thing. If it's a more recent poem, like you can tell this is a more modern poem just because it's about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, so it has to be since the 1970s. They built that memorial in the early 90s, I think, or the late 80s. So, and you can also tell by the structure of the poem that it's a more modern poem. It's a free verse poem. And sometimes if you look down here, it will tell you the copyright date of the poem. So you can kind of get a little feel for if it's an older poem or if it's a newer poem. If it's a newer poem, then you have to think of things like images, comparisons, try to think about what does this have to do with modern life. The poem is written from the first person perspective of a veteran who is going, a Vietnam veteran who is going to the memorial in order to, you know, pay his respects, even though he was in the war. But, you know, he had friends who died in the war. And he acknowledges that he struggles to go and look at the memorial because it's going to bring back, you know, uncomfortable memories from when he was in the war and all those issues of why did I survive and others didn't? And the fact that it's shiny plays a big part in the imagery and the descriptions of the poem. I'm not going to read it because we want to get to our practice today, but he envisions himself in the memorial, outside the memorial. It's hard to tell. He has sort of like this surreal aspect where it's hard for him to tell what's in the memorial and what's just a reflection of the memorial. And in that way, it's sort of a representation of being in the war, being not in the war, and you know, he was obviously in the war. All the following contrasts are integral to the poem except happiness and sorrow. I don't think that's a contrast that's present very strongly in the poem. Past and present is there obviously because you have the memorial to the war. Light and dark because you've got the names which are smoke colored and then the black granite. Also, you've got the outside people standing there and then the dark granite of the memorial. Illusion and reality, he mixes up whether a woman's gesture is wiping or brushing her son's hair. So there's that, and then fusion and separation, being in the wall, being out of the wall. So you can kind of like do a cross off with that kind of question. The imagery of the poem is characterized by C, transformation and duality. Now here's an example of a word that you might or might not have come across before, but you can figure it out. Sometimes there are words that are a little bit confusing, but if you just think about them and what you already know about other words, you can determine what they mean. Like duality, you can see dual there, which means two. So you can understand that duality means two things at one time, right? So the poem is very much, the imagery especially is about transformation and two things at one time. 15 lines 20 to 21 most strongly convey the speaker's sense of how permanent the fate of those is, the fate of those named. Oh, because line 20 and 21. When she walks away, the names stay on the wall. Right, that's pretty straightforward if you go back to the poem. If you don't go back to the poem, I don't know, just try to guess it. I think you'll probably struggle a little bit there. Number 16, the mirror-like quality of the granite walls allows the speaker to experience all the following in the poem except. Okay, so this is another troubling one on the poem. So the except is the thing you have to pay attention to. So you're eliminating correct answers. The mirror-like quality of the granite walls allows the speaker to experience all these things except not what? So self-effacement, that's when you like sort of bash yourself. Self-awareness, self-respect, The illusion of having been transformed, identification with the memorialized veterans. So if you forget about the word accept, then you probably answered any one of these other ones. Self-respect isn't doubted in this poem. It's not that he doesn't respect himself, it's just that the memorial makes him feel sort of self-conscious and not understanding why he came back and some of the other people didn't. And then also that transformation as he sees himself reflected in the face of the memorial. This was a 50-50 one for the class. The poem is best described as a series of interrelated impressions. So this is a structure question. They're asking, how does the poem flow? In what manner? Does it expose a universal symbol? No. It exposes the memorial, but that's not a universal symbol that means the same thing to everybody in the world. Political analysis, it's not about why we were in the war or the effects of the war or anything that you'd read in a social studies book. It's not a wartime anecdote. We don't hear about what happened to him in the war. And it's also not a sentimental reminiscence. Reminiscence usually means that you're looking back at something fondly, like with happiness. And although he's looking back, he's not reminiscing. He's not eagerly thinking about those times. So your best answer there is A. The last question, what does the speaker convey in lines 29 through 31? Let me go back. In the Black Mirror, a woman's trying to erase names. No, she's brushing a boy's hair. Well, erasing names would mean that they were still alive, right? Like if you could take the name off the wall, it would symbolize that they didn't die in the war. And you can't do that, but it would be nice to think so. So the question is, what's conveyed? E, the uncertainty about the meaning of a gesture. So is the way her hands moving looks like it could be crossing out, wiping out names, or she could be brushing her son's hair. And so it's sort of like a little bit of a confusion. So hopefully going through those helps you a little bit with multiple choice. We have another practice, number 3 is for next Wednesday. So next Wednesday in class, we won't have a written practice. I think we'll wait and just do one more written practice. We've already done 5 after today. And then that way we can practice the multiple choice a little bit longer. There's 4 passages. The actual exam will have 5 passages. Any questions on multiple choice before we move into the practice for today? I know I'm a little bit behind in time.